Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 327. Afreilich and Chodesh Cheshvan. We're coming from the rich, saturated month of Tishrei, of all the high holidays, and entering now into the month of Cheshvan. We took a break of several weeks of my life due to the holidays being on Sundays, but now we resume with even more gusto and passion than ever as we enter the new year, Tofshin Pei Aleph. This program is dedicated in honor of the engagement of Menachem Mendel Leiter and Esther Jacobson, dedicated by the Jacobson family. The Rebbe taught us that every situation is an opportunity. So even though one can argue that, look, Tishrei, the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shemini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, and all the days in between, elevated us all. So now it would seem to be a downtime. No. Everything is an opportunity. We're now empowered with the resources we were given during the Tishrei season to help us enter the new year. And this is indeed the whole kavanah and purpose of existence, is not to remain on a lofty spiritual level, but to bring that spirituality and that inspiration into our mundane daily lives. So in time, Cheshvan represents exactly that purpose. So in space, you would say, the birth of a human being is the descent of the soul from the higher spiritual levels to this physical world, to make a dira b'tachtenim, a home for the divine in this material world, the lowest of all worlds. And in time, that's like the transition from Tishrei to Cheshvan. So within lies the actual purpose of existence. Now is the real litmus test of what we accomplished. Because you see it not when everything is a celebration. In a month like this month, as we shall be discussing. Now, we cannot ignore the fact that we're living in unique time. Tishrei and now Cheshvan, for the first time perhaps in history, we have a global disruption, a pandemic, coupled with, especially in the United States, political polarization, unprecedented, with the election season tripled by the racial tensions and by so many other factors that nobody could have even written such a script. So Tishrei was challenging for many of us. Not everyone was able to go to shul. Not everybody was able to celebrate the usual way. But as we discussed at length, especially once COVID-19 began, around Purim time, 7 months ago, that the Eibishter runs the world. And every situation, he does not ask us to do something we don't have the power to do. It may not be in our comfort zone. It may not be the conventional, ritualistic way we usually do things, but that does not mean you cannot serve God, God forbid. On the contrary, it means you have the opportunity to now serve in a new way. Not new activities, but Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot was an opportunity to do it in a way that was never done before, precisely because of the challenges. And the same, even more so, can be said about Cheshvan. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this transition. So one of the central themes of the Rebbe, as we would speak about when we would go from Tishrei into Cheshvan. In Tofshin Nun, the Rebbe spoke a sikha and explained and asked the question, why in the month of Cheshvan do we not find even one holiday? Every month of the year there's at least one holiday. In Kislev will be Chanukah. In Teves there's Asara B'Teves. Even though it's a fast day, but it's a significant day. It'll be Yehovcha Yom HaMelech L'Moedim Tevim, L'Sosan L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim, to a holiday. In Adar you have Purim. In Nisan you have Pesach. In Iyar the whole month is a month of counting the mitzvahs for the Se'emer. You have Lag BaEmer, you have Pesach Sheni. in Sivan Shavuos, in Tammuz Shivasa b'Tammuz. Again, you have Chiyom Melu. In Av, you have Tisha B'Av, Tu B'Av, and Elul. The whole month of Elul is a month of Merachamim. Only month in the year there's no holiday, and this contrast couldn't be stronger. From a month that's Meruba b'Meides, most of it is holidays, which is Tishrei. A month that's called in Medrash Chodesh Hashvi, from the word Shvi, Muzba. It's sated, saturated, filled with holidays. Not one holiday. You got Rosh Hashanah, Seres Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippur, the days before Sukkot, Hishayna Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. And suddenly, stark contrast, you jump into a month of Cheshvan with no holidays. Could have been allocated a little more evenly. And the Rebbe explains, because that's precisely the purpose of Cheshvan. That when you don't have the Giluyim, the revelations, what will you do? So if Cheshvan had even one holiday, there'd be some, I guess, crutch. I don't want to use that word exactly, but that's the idea. Now you're thrown into so-called a barren month. Never barren, but in a revealed way. And this tests how you experienced and what you learned from and how you were empowered by the holidays. And this is a global lesson in everything in life, and especially in our time. When things are riding well, it's relatively easy to follow our routines because it's our comfort zone. But when we're challenged and we're suddenly thrust into a new environment, something unexpected, upended, destabilized, disruptions, upheavals, whatever you want to call it, unknowns and uncertainties, that's when we are revealed to see who you truly are. That's the month of Cheshvan. So it's actually a month of the deepest revelation because it discovers who you are, not what you are like under the influence of others or of the power of holidays or other things that are giving you strength. What will you do when you stand, so to speak, alone? We're never alone, but the perception is one of. So the transition, therefore, from Tishrei to Cheshvan is about that. That's its essential message, and it couldn't be more timely. Compare it to a tea bag. You don't know how strong it is until you put it into hot water. You don't know who you are until you're thrust into a place that you're not comfortable. And we were trained. We were trained by the Rebbe. We were trained by the Rabbeim, by Chassidus, precisely for times like this. Now, of course, we would love to have everything going exactly as planned, comfortable, schedules, certainties. Here we have the chaos of what's going to happen with our schools, with our children, some of us with our jobs, where we're living. How long is this going to drag on? Health issues. And it's not a game or a joke. Serious things happen. People died. Many losses. And yet, we're not given a challenge we cannot deal with. Not just deal with, but become stronger in the process. And that's what Mar Cheshvan is. The Rebbe explains the word Mar Cheshvan. Mar. Mar comes from the word bitter, because you don't have the revelations. There are different explanations for Mar. It also has from Mar Midli, like a drop, the beginnings of rain in Israel, Tfilas Geshem, and other meanings. But it signifies a type of drought, and at the same time, it brings out a deeper strength. So it's a lesson in general, and especially for our times. Someone writes to me, "Dear Rabbi Jacobson, it's not your fault that the past few Sundays were Yom Tov days, and you weren't able to do your Sunday night broadcast. But can we ask for a 2-hour special to catch up on lost time when the holidays are over? Thank you." So this is a good example. when you have something that seemingly you're unable to experience, but then you double and triple it. Well, should I do this 2-hour thing? I'm still considering it. I'm not going to do it today, but maybe I'll add a little time to each of the next programs to so-called compensate. I want to make sure that this is a dover hashava lekel, that people, an hour is also quite long. 2 hours may be taxing people's patience. So not that I question my own ability to share some ideas, but we have to always do things with a measure. But I appreciate your words, and I shared them with everybody. So that's exactly what the Rabbeim did every year, Rosh Hashanah, every year, the new year. They would always take on a new achlata, a new resolution. That's something we should learn from. Every year take on a new resolution. What's the resolution we'll take on this year? So I can make a suggestion in general, as Chassidim especially. Your Futza Meinesecha Chutza is always the core mission, to bring the Geula, Osim Marda Malk Mashiach. And especially in this time where people are more receptive than ever, perhaps the resolution should be, in addition to your own adding and increasing in your learning of Torah in general, Chassidus specifically, perhaps to also commit to share with others. Commit yourself every week to share a thought, an idea, an inspiration with 10 others that you have not communicated with. It can be people from family, friends, strangers, people you met at work, your sphere, where you orbit. Imagine if each of us takes a proactive action of that nature. It's not the numbers, but that creates energy. That generates and creates the ripple effect, what we call the Pu'ula Nimsheches, a perpetual impact on ourselves and on others. Just a suggestion. But that's exactly what's expected of us right now. Many people say, okay, we're going from the holidays. Okay, now we have to settle back in, and we have the pandemic challenges, and these challenges, only exacerbated and amplified by the crazy media and the politicization of it all. So we could say, yeah, let me just manage, try to maintain my life. No, it's not enough. We have to go on the offense. The best defense is offense, both for ourselves and for our children and our families. So as we enter this new year, Tovshin Pei Aleph, some have, based on the Rebbe's footnote back in Tovshin Nun Aleph, have identified this year as Tehishnas Ployes Arenu. The Rebbe then said Tehishnas Nifloyes Arenu, from the Pasuk, Kimet Seis Chemeretz Mitzrayim Arenu Nifloyes. So Ployes Arenu. So not just doing things regularly, but Ployes, a form of appella. Wonder, Chassidus explains, means going beyond your regular. Tanya Perek Tezvav, such a fundamental Perek chapter, where he talks about the power of that shift, that you go beyond your comfort zone, beyond your routine, beyond your pattern. That is what is expected of us. And it brings out the best in us and has a power to transform the environment and the world around us. And especially in our day and age, with all these challenges, it's not just enough to play defense. We have to show a living example of what it means to lead. And lead doesn't necessarily mean over millions of people. It means in your environment, in your community, in your personal life, to initiate, to be proactive and not reactive. So that's what Cheshvan tests us with. What are you going to do? In a general sense, you could say everything after post Gimel Tammuz is in a sense also that same idea. What Aveda b'koyach atzmei. When the Rebbe was here revealed, we all danced with the Rebbe. It wasn't difficult. You come, it was a gewaldige party, a Chassidic party. The Rebbe would lead the way. People just lifted on his wings. But now when that's concealed, what are you going to do? And the Rebbe told us 30 years ago, Chav Ches Nissen this year will be 30 years when the Rebbe said, I did everything I can do. Tut als was ir kan. Do what you can. That is the Cheshvan message. Do what you can when the Gilui of Tishrei is not there, when the Gilui of the Rebbe is not in the fullest sense of the word. That doesn't mean it's not accessible, but it means you need that extra effort that you need to initiate, because someone else is not going to do it for you. And in a way, this is the whole mission of the seventh generation, Der Ashvi. We're now in the 70 years from when the Rebbe assumed leadership. That, what did he say after the Maimer? Don't deceive yourself into thinking I'm going to do the work for you. I will not deprive from, I will not decline and deprive you from my help, but you have to do your work. So that is a fundamental principle in general in Yiddishkeit, aveda b'koyach atzmei. But specifically that is emphasized in this month of Cheshvan. We also have, it's also the week of Parshas Noach, the second Parsha of the Torah. And as I mentioned, it's Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, which is Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month. So everything about Cheshvan that we just discussed, this is the head, as emphasized in Chassidus, that the head, Rosh, is more than just Tchilas HaChodesh. Like Rosh Hashanah is more than just Tchilas Hashanah. Not just the beginning and the top of the year, the top, like the head of the year, but it's the head, which is also Kailal, encompasses like the central nervous system, the entire body. Same in time. The head of the year or the head of the month encompasses all the days of the month. So this is a day when what you establish today carries us through this month, and of course then continues on the months that follow. So what is Parshas Noach? The same theme. In Parsha Bereshis we read how God created the world. It's all God's work from above. Mamayla lamata. First day, second day, light, separation, and so on. Until the sixth day, first Rosh Hashanah, God creates the human being, Adam and Chava, man and woman, male and female in the divine image, and charges them, la'avda l'shamra, serve and protect. That's the work you have to do. Transform this world. Then there is, of course, the sin, chet of Etzadas, and the descent. But overall, Bereshis, as its name implies, is the beginning. It's the beginning, it's the creation. Everything is put into place. Where does it come to a point of really hitting rock bottom? Noach. At the end of Bereshis, we read already what happened with the generations. It continued to devolve, corruption, worse, more deteriorating, till the place of Mola Oretz Chomos, beginning of Noach, this week's Parsha. The earth was filled with Chomos, with crime, and the worst crimes. And what happened with all the Giluyim of Bereshis? They were taken for granted. The Rebbe explains a number of sichos. They lived long because it was Chasdish HaKadosh Baruch Hu. First 26 generations, Nuzunim b'Chasdish HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like a child, he's given a lot of gifts, but sometimes when you're given gifts, you don't appreciate them. So now came the unfortunate Mabul. The Mabul, because Mola Oretz Chomes had to be cleansed. But the Mabul was not an end in itself. It was meant to create Olam Chodesh, a new world. And now you're going to have to demonstrate with your own efforts, not my gift of long life. That's why life changed to 120 years, life expectancy, instead of the long years of those that lived before the Mabul. Now you have to do it mamata l'mayla. So after the Mabul begins the journey of a new world, Noach exiting the Teva and entering the world, a new world with all the trepidation and hesitation, with the goal of transforming the world. But this time now you have to do it on your own efforts. So Noach captures that paradox. On one hand, the world comes to this dark place. Then there's the cleansing. That's why it says the 40 days and nights of the Mabul is compared to a mikveh of 40 cubits. A taris ha'avir, taris ha'oretz, in order to rebuild. But this time with much more deliberate effort coming from below, a Cheshvan type of approach. So Noach always corresponds to the beginning of Cheshvan for that reason, to give us that message and that strength. And at the end of Parsha Noach, what do we have? The birth of Avram Avinu. So like it says in the Sichos of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that Parshas Noach was a kalamut nevoch, a more sadder week. And Parsha Lech Lecha is a simcha dikvach, but Parsha Noach not incompletely, because at the end of the Parsha is the birth of Avram Avinu, which is going to be the birth of light. He will begin to reverse the process, as the famous Medrash that's cited in the beginning of Basar Ligani, that the 7 generations where the Shekhinah was concealed and removed from the earth to the first heaven, to the second heaven, to the third heaven, and so on, And Avram begins to bring it back down. Because Avram began to recognize, again through his own efforts, not from above. He went on a journey from below upward, from the bottom up, to discover God and to bring God to everyone in this world. And that would then only accumulate with Yitzchak and Yaakov and all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu, 7th generation from Avram, v'shachanti b'seicha, who would bring the Shekhinah back down to earth as it was in the beginning of time, before Adam and Chava had eaten from the tree of knowledge, of good and evil. So you have really in this chapter, in these chapters, the story of life, as it is within the months of Tishrei and Cheshvan, Bereshis, Noach, the story of life. We begin in a very beautiful, high, lofty spiritual place. We then thrust into a world that is much darker, with a mission of transforming that challenge into a far greater place. Because after Avram and Moshe, and then the generations that are to come, including our generation, we would ultimately bring the Geula, which will be even greater than the revelation that was there in the beginning of time. Because, as I said earlier, the challenge is meant to bring out even deeper strengths. And again, in this time period that we're in, the message couldn't be more relevant, because it's exactly what we're going through. Whatever disruption, whatever unknown, is all part of the deeper plan. Again, not something we asked for, what we wanted, expected, but this is what it is. So we have to learn how to rise above the challenges and actually transform them into tremendous assets and strengths. And that's absolutely possible. I've seen it with my own eyes, how people during these challenging times have risen to the occasion in most beautiful ways. Giving, kindness, volunteering, putting themselves even at risk. I don't mean in a negative way, in a health way, but in meaning putting themselves out to help another. So this is the potential each of us has. Does that mean that many of us are not challenged and we can't find those deeper strengths? Yes, that's possible. That's why we're here together, to talk about it, to learn about it, to look to Chassidus, to look to the Rabbeim for strength. That's essentially the mission of MyLife, Chassidus Applied. So with that transition, let me answer one more question regarding this. Someone asked, is there a significance and connection that the flood of Noach lasted 40 days and Moshe Rabbeinu went up on Mount Sinai for 40 days? Truth be told, I did not see the connection. I have not seen in any form the connection. I'm sure a little more research I'll find it. If any of you actually do see or find something, please share it with me. And here's a good opportunity. Go to ChassidusApplied.com. There's a forum there. You can comment, ask questions completely anonymously, or share any sources or anything you'd like to comment on what I'm discussing, and I will share it in the coming episodes with the listeners. So is there significance? So ostensibly, I'm sure there is a significance. I mentioned Arboim Yom is also, Arboim saw the 40 cubits of the mikveh. Matan Torah, 40 days. 40 has sometimes understood as being encompassing all the 4 worlds times 10, 10 times 4. There's many different meanings in Mem. Mem is a very significant word, and every letter in the Hebrew alphabet is significant, but it has many meanings. The beginning of Shas, the end of Shas, Me'emesai, and Shalom, Mem. And there's a small Mem, there's a Mem Psucha, Mem Stuma. So there's different levels of what Mem represents in Chassidus and Kabbalah. So I'm sure there's a connection between the two. I mean, the one that came most obvious seems to be that Mabul was the beginning of cleansing the world. Lech Lecha and Avram would be the beginning of the Yichud of Matan Torah, says the Arizal. So Matan Torah, in a way, is a conclusion of this all, because that's when the world ultimately is ready for the fusion of matter and spirit. Del Yenim Ba'olamato, Tachtenim Yalo Lamaila, that there would be a fusion between being able to transform the physical world into a spiritual environment, taking the physical world and turning it to a chefze, to actually turning it into a chefze shel kedusha, something holy. Not just to bring holiness there, but to transform existence itself into a holy environment. So that, of course, is what a mikveh is all about. A bitl, tefillah with a beis. To immerse yourself in a mikveh is the same letters as the Mittler Rebbe brings in Siddur. Imdach is the same letters as habitl, which means the subjugation, or the when a person goes into a mikveh, all of you is completely covered. So you're completely surrounded and engulfed by a higher presence. Mayim representing Das Hashem, Deus Hashem, and it's actually the way to transform the Mola Oretz Chomos, a world filled with crime, with Mola Oretz Deus Hashem, Kamayim Layam Mechasim. Same few first words, Mola Oretz. The world is filled, but what is it filled with? Will it be filled with the corruption and the crime and the injustices of Chomos during the time of the Mabul? All will be filled, and of course that's the kavanah, to fill it and transform it to a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea, and then will be lo yareu v'lo yashchisu, no evil and no destruction, because it's filled with divine knowledge. When there was already a certain taste of this during Matan Torah, as the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 36 in Tanya. So there you have it all connected, the Mem. And why Mem? Because Mem 40 is a full cycle of cleansing, a full cycle of purification and elevation. Okay. For more on this topic of Rosh Chodesh, Cheshvan, and Noach, please go to episodes 135, 184, and 280. This is cross-referencing to other episodes. All this can be found at our powerful resource center at ChassidusApplied.com. All previous episodes are there. You can download them as podcasts in all different forms and fashions. There you could also, as I mentioned, submit any question or comment completely anonymously. And you have the other resources, the classes I do now daily in Ayin Beis, the different essays and writings on Samach Vov, Tzadik Daled, and other Chassidic discourses. Of course, also the essays. This year we concluded before Tishrei, we announced the 6th annual essay winners and creative winners. And I will, of course, be doing each week, I will be reviewing a few of those as well. So that can all be found at ChassidusApplied.com. Please take advantage of it. And with that, we shall move now to a bunch of questions. This is now 4 weeks since we didn't do the last program, so you could imagine the questions accumulated, and they've already been accumulating, so now I have even more backup, but I'm not complaining. It's actually a good sign. Halavai, only such good challenges, to have more questions, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate and how touched I am, because this is a sign of a vibrant relationship, where there are questions and comments and rebuttals and agreements and disagreements. That's what a relationship is about. It would be very sad if I did these programs and no one ever commented and there were no questions. I don't know how long I would actually continue, because maybe nobody's interested. But the point being is that thank you for this, because that's what the whole purpose of Chassidus, the Rabbeim, that's what they wanted. They wanted us to talk about this. Obviously, talking should lead to action. But the first step is awareness, discussion. And even if there's a disagreement, I'm not saying that there's any particular disagreement right now, but I don't mean disagreement in a negative way. I mean that there's a live, vibrant discussion with people's opinions. So please, see this as a provocation. I'm trying to provoke you. Anything I say that you feel you have a different opinion on, or a different thought, or an additional thought, please don't hesitate. I will not be insulted. I'll actually be insulted the other way around if you don't speak up. So I embrace different opinions. This is the whole beauty of what diversity is about. Ein Day saying Shavuos. The goal is to take Chassidus of the Rabbeim, apply it to our lives. And of course, in that context, there's so many different ways to apply things and different approaches. They don't necessarily have to contradict each other, but everyone enriches the other. We all enrich each other. So please see this as an invitation, actually a request from my heart, from the depths of my heart, that this is what I believe is one of the most important, if not the most important mission of our time, to take the Torah and Chassidus of the Rabbeim, that they were Meiser Nefesh, the hours, think of those thousands of hours and blood, sweat and tears they invested in every word that they wrote, that they spoke, that they asked of us. Now we are in the Cheshvan state, where they gave us Tishrei, these resources, and we have to now unpack it. Yaakov holech, which we'll speak about a bit later at the end of the program. Unpack it as the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in one of the Sikhs, that in Tishrei we gather so many resources. And it's like when you travel, and then you gather all types of gifts and resources and treasures, and then you come back home and you have to fananda packen de peklach, means unpack the peklach, the baggage, the luggage. So now you unpack it and we internalize it in our lives. This is what we are here for. And by doing so, especially in a time of need like this, we actually fulfill the core mission of the Deir HaShvi, Lahirid HaShchina, to bring the Shechina down to this earth, to transform our very daily, mundane, detailed lives, transform them to be a dira, a home, a channel, a platform, all the different expressions you can use of divine presence, which of course is the essence of what Geula is. Gili alakuz be'elam hazeh hagashmi. Gili erein sov be'elam hazeh hagashmi, as the Alter Rebbe says right at the outset, at the beginning of chapter 37 in Tanya, when he says the purpose of existence, Tachlis, of Yemesa Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim, is Gili erein sov, Nigla Kved Hashem v'ro kol bosar yachdov. So many of the prayers we said, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, were all about this message. Eineid mulvade, ata reis ladas, ki Hashemu Elokim, eineid mulvade, recognizing that here in this material world, and each of us is indispensable in fulfilling this mission. It's not a matter of measure of space or time. Doing what you can with your skills, with your opportunities, with your divine ordained place in this world, to do exactly that. And when we finish that process, which of course is accumulative over all the generations, the Geula is a natural result of it all. And the Rebbe has promised us and told us that we're right at the threshold. It's the tipping point. I am the last person to help explain why it hasn't happened yet. The Rebbe himself said many times in Fabrengens, why the Mashiach didn't come after all the signs have been fulfilled and we did all the Avedim, it's ending the Avedim Saberurim, finished the work of refining the Berurim, the clarifications and separations and elevations of the world. That was the Rebbe's final response. I have a question. So the questions we have, but questions don't impede us from moving forward. A soldier in an army cannot stop forward movement, forward progress due to the fact we have questions. You have questions, fine. Find the time, you talk about it with yourself, with your mashpia, people you trust. But we move forward and we forge ahead. It's a new year. And despite when someone says, well, what happened last year and 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Yes, of course we all can retreat into the voice of the cynic or the skeptic and say, if it didn't happen until now, what's going to happen now? But that, is, we know, is not coming from necessarily the holy voice in ourselves. That's coming from the weaker voice, or the skeptic voice, the demoralizing voice. So we have to embrace the other voice that says, no, what can we do that hasn't been done till now? We look forward. We cannot look back. You can learn from what's the past, to not repeat the same mistakes and to improve upon them. But the goal here is to move forward. We're in a new year. Alter Rebbe says, Nageres HaKedesh, Simin Yadal, Ir Chodesh U'Mechudesh, a new unprecedented energy that was never here before, has entered into existence. Now it's our job to unpack that energy, to internalize it, to present it to all those that we come in contact with. I am totally committed to this, more and stronger than ever. Imloi achshav emasai. If not now with this global wake-up call, when? And if not you, who? So this is where we're at right now, and this is the commitment that we all should be making, each in our own way, as we enter this new year, going from Tishrei into Cheshvan. Well, now the segue into the big majority of questions that came in the last weeks has, of course, been this chaos that just doesn't seem to go away. As I mentioned earlier, this chaos is now on so many different levels. It began ostensibly with the pandemic back in March, or whenever we registered it, which affected, of course, health issues, travel, Pesach plans, school, public assembly. Who has not been impacted one way or other? Our jobs. We all know what's going on the last 7 months. Everyone thought at some point this is going to die down, and by June, July, August, it would all be over. We go back to normal. Well, that hasn't exactly happened. And it still remains hanging the uncertainty. Suffolk is one of the worst things. Suffolk Gematria Molek. Ein simcha kataras asfechas. There's no joy as resolving doubts. The doubt. And then, of course, the other questions. The different conflicting messages we get. The internal frustrations we have. Throw in politics. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's disgraceful. How it's just become a power-grabbing situation. The hatred, inability to communicate. I mean, I can go on, and it doesn't help the situation when you're aware of it. And how much of that distorts and impacts our health situation. Who could you believe? Who can't you believe? Are they using it for political purposes? All these are now coming to the head. Then we had, of course, the whole uprising after the murder, the killing of George Floyd. Whether you call it a murder or not is also up to debate. The point being is that it didn't help the situation. And unfortunately, we don't have leaders. Nobody is showing clarity and direction. There may be people that have their heads screwed on right, but even that has to be determined. I mean, it's a big mess. And yet, here we are, the Jewish people. We've been through a lot more and a lot worse. That doesn't sound a nechama, it's not a consolation. But it means we have something to hold on to. Yes, we do. We have the Eibishter. We have the Torah. Ein lecha ben chayrin el misha esek b'Torah. I remember clearly when the Rebbe once said in the Fabrengen, it doesn't say kol misha esek b'Torah hu ben chayrin. It says ein lecha ben chayrin el misha esek b'Torah. You can learn Torah and also not be free. Because you learn Torah, but maybe you're not learning it the proper way, and you're still consumed by world politics and other things. But if you want to be free, you cannot be free except Torah. Why not? Why can't a person be a free human being? Everyone feels in a democracy like the United States or other countries, I'm a free person. Nobody's imprisoning me. I'm not being held hostage. I'm not under threat. Because being a prisoner, let's put it this way, a ben chayrin is more than just the absence of prison. A truly free person is not just someone who doesn't have a ball and chain. A truly free person is a person whose spirit, whose mind, whose heart is not held hostage by others. Someone who's not a conformist, someone who's not impacted by what others think, someone who's not defined by the politics of the moment. Because they hold on to the Eibishter's Torah from another reality. Alpayim shana kodmet Torah le'ilim, the Torah comes from another reality. It's giving you a taste of another reality. Freedom is only possible in another reality, because as long as it's man-made, even if it's so-called a free institution, it's still coming from the same place where the problems come. So can a mortal give another mortal freedom? Yes, we can write laws. The founding fathers established a country, as the Rebbe called it, a divine ordained country, because they based it on Torah principles, that a God, a creator, endowed human beings with unalienable rights. And as a result of that, all people are created equal. But if you don't invoke the God in the Torah, and there are books that have already documented how the founding fathers built their principles. One person calls it, Michael Novak, in his book called On Two Wings, he writes that it's based on Torah metaphysics. They were not Jews, they were Christians. But regardless, whatever denomination or non-denomination, that's what they built it upon. Because you can only find freedom in this world, because we're not free human beings if you think about mortality. We're dependent on food, on drink, on shelter, on clothing, on health. We're fragile human beings. It is by virtue of the fact that we were created in the divine image, as we read yesterday, Shabbos, Parshas. By virtue of the fact that God gives us God-given tools and resources that allows us to rise above the din, above the turbulence of a material world. Materialism, by definition, holds us hostage. Doesn't matter how much money you have, how much power you have. As I said, prison is not just prison, physical prison, it's also prison in the mind. if you feel that you cannot be a person, a complete person, without material success and money and so on, as the Frierdiker Rebbe said to that person who pointed the gun to him, he says, this gun can frighten someone who has one God and one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and two or many worlds. So Torah allows us to rise above this whole noise and not be defined by it. And that is ultimately our refuge. And that's exactly what we do. That's Parshas Noach. Mayim Rabim, the turbulent waters, Daigas HaParnosa, the worries of livelihood, or the worries of health, or the worries of all the uncertainties we're dealing. Mayim Rabim of our day died. There's no better two words to describe the upheavals of our time. Build a Selecha Teva. Build a Teva, says the Baal Shem Tov, Teva. You could use another word for a boat. There's Aniyah, there's Sfina. Teva, from the word Teva, from word. A Teva is a word. The Tevas of Torah and Tefillah, the words of Torah and Tefillah, they become the ark, the oasis, the refuge from the turbulent waters, the raging flood waters around us, whatever they may be, whether they were Golos Mitzrayim back then, or Golos Bavel, or Golos Remi Edem, whatever Golos we went through, the more lenient ones and the harsher ones. Chol David Der Emdim Aleinu L'Chalesenu. But we have that Torah, the Tevas HaTorah VaTefillah, or the turbulence of our times. And that is what allows us to be Ben Chedin, to be free, and be defined by that. And then you look at the world around you and say, okay, how does it fit into God's plan? Instead of starting off with the beginning, okay, what do the candidates say? What do the health experts say? Obviously, the Torah itself tells us to listen to health experts, which we'll talk about in a moment more. But it's all based on, because God created a world, and He said the world, there's guidelines, how to follow the instructions, and so on. So that's an introduction that's going to answer a few questions that were asked, and I want to address those questions now. And I refer you again to episodes 300 and on, where I spoke some of these themes and ideas when it all began, the pandemic back in March, back Purim time. Which health guidelines should we be following today according to the Torah? Well, we know like this. The Torah told us, Nitn Reshus L'Reif L'Rapes, V'Rapa Yerapa, Posuk Mishpotim. That means God, the special Posuk comes to give permission for a healer to heal. If you look in the Gemara, because there could be a Havamina, that's not the case. Maybe God is the healer. Ani Hashem Refecha, only God is the healer. No. And it's consistent with the whole way the Torah works. The Torah says, the Torah was given into so-called a world of human beings that are subject to the laws of nature. So of course it's all governed by God. But even though there's Shem Havaya, there's Shem Elikim, B'Gematria Teva. In nature, God said, follow Ein Semchen Alanes, do not rely on miracles. Even though of course God can perform any miracle. We pray to God for miracles, for healing. But I want you to work with the blessings I implanted. The doctor is not the healer, I'm the healer, but I'm doing it through the doctor. So yes, we have to listen to doctors. But what happens, which one should we follow when you have doctors of different opinions? So the way Torah answers this question, Al Pi Halacha, and the Rebbe cites it many times, go to the doctors you know, you trust. Even the medical profession, they say, who's your primary medical doctor? Who's your primary medical, whatever the word is. So there is the idea of a doctor who knows you. Trust. If you have a question about one doctor says something, go to a second. And if you need, go to a third, then you follow 2 out of 3. Is it subjective? Because if you went to 3 other doctors, you may get different opinions. But those are the ones that are handy and that you trust. You did Reife. Reife you did, as the Rebbe writes in so many letters. So that's a simple kol, the poshet MyLife. Sometimes the simplest approach is the best approach. Tomim tiyim Hashem alekecha. We don't need to overthink this. How many letters did the Rebbe write? Don't become a doctor. You're not a doctor. You go to the doctor, trust him. You put your head on learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, following what Hashem wants. Hand in hand with listening. So even though it's confusing, yes, and you can question whether your doctor has been brainwashed or he's part of this party or that party, so go to a second. And if you need, go to 2 out of 3. That's the simplest answer to this question. And I've had it from so many people have asked me this question, both in writing, in person, on the phone, and so on. Okay, but this, of course, goes into a little more complicated discussion. And I'll share with you just before I continue. There was a Chassid who wrote to the Rebbe, he had an issue. So the Rebbe said to go to Yedidim Evinim, friends that are experts. He writes back to the Rebbe, I don't want friends, I want the Rebbe's advice. So the Rebbe says, Vos ardir, why does it bother you? As ich will empfern durch Yedidim Evinim, that I'll answer you through the friends, the experts. In other words, when the Torah says go to a doctor, that's the way Hashem is answering you. Obviously, coupled with that should be Amunah and Betochen and Tragut Vetzaingut and all that comes with that. That's also part of the healing. So when we go to someone, we're actually going to, that's like going to the Torah. That's what we should be doing, because Torah is ultimately not man-made. It's not man-made science. It's not subject to man-made ideas. Medicine is. Healing is not the actual power of healing. But the methods used is ultimately human beings have devised different methods, and Hashem blesses them, and some are successful, and hopefully all are successful. But when you get a directive from a doctor, it's like getting a directive that the Torah is telling you. So it's the Torah intervening, and Hashem is intervening. And again, I said how to do that when you have conflicting, I already mentioned how to address that. But let's go a little more controversial, shall we say. Why do so many members of the community disregard social distancing and limitation of numbers of congregants rules mandated by the city of New York? Look at the pictures of slichus services at 770 or other synagogues throughout the high holiday season. Doesn't such conduct, potential exposure to a deadly virus and the potential to expose others to illness or death, defy the mandates of both Torah and the law of the land? How does it not set a bad example of the Jewish community to the rest of society? It exposes everyone to contracting illness that can kill or seriously compromise the health of people for years to come. Your thoughts? Another person writes, this is just 2 of, I would say, at least 30 questions in similar vein, and sometimes the opposite approach. So second question, why is it that when a rabbi says, write God's name in a mezuzah and put it on your door for protection, everyone listens? But when a rabbi says, follow doctor's advice and wear a mask for your and others' protection, many don't listen. Are we allowed to pick and choose which mitzvahs we follow and when we follow the rabbis? If so, can I just pick not to keep Shabbos, for example? Okay, well, let me address it in the context. I am talking here strictly from a Torah Chassidus approach, what we learned from the Rebbe in other using precedents of situations that happen, not necessarily pandemic, but similar ideas, health issues. If your doctor tells you, and you go to a second doctor, and 2 out of 3 tell you to wear a mask, or whether you should travel or not, or whether you should go to shul or not, that's who you should listen to. This is not about a mandate of New York. The doctors know what those mandates are. Now, I'm not suggesting that New York can't give out a mandate. We hope it's based on true medical advice. But there are others that are arguing that it's politically driven. Look at recently, we're going to talk about it shortly, about the protests. Is it political? They're targeting Jewish communities and not other communities. Look what happened to the Black Lives Matter protests. Why didn't they enforce laws then? So some are arguing that many of these guidelines are political. And some say even worse than political. It's all about just winning an election. So they painted their own reality. I am not here coming to paskin and give you which way it is, because I could see a gray area. Some things are true, some things not so true, some have different opinions. One thing is clear, nobody knows exactly what's going on. If they knew what's going on, they'd have it under control. So clearly, even the methods that they're trying to enforce, are they working? Has lockdown worked? Are masks working? What would it be without masks? So I am not going to rule on this. I'm not a doctor. I definitely know that there are medical issues involved, but there are also political issues involved, and there are also other nonsense involved. We all know that. I hope we all know that. So how do you find clarity? But the Eibishter still created us and gave us a Torah. That's why I said, let's go to the simple approach. Find your doctor, listen to him or her. If you need 2 out of 3, 2 out of 3, and that's that. You want to talk about the politics of it? We can talk about it. But that's not the key. The key is what to do. Now, regarding therefore your question, the answer is this. If doctors indeed and Rabbonim gave guidelines, then it's absolutely reckless and hepech Torah for someone to defy that. Whether people travel during the high holiday season that they shouldn't have, or people are disregarding different rulings. But let's not make the city of New York God. Let's not make that Torah. It's the Torah that says Nitin Reshus L'Rei Filarapis. Now the city of New York is a government, and they have medical experts, and we're hoping they're following them. That's why I'm saying, to really get clarity, speak to your own doctors. I would assume that most doctors are following most of these guidelines, even though some are skeptical, for different reasons. Remember, there's also another factor, that even if you can question whether masks and social distancing are really the right approach to take, there's the Chil Hashem element. If many people feel it is and you stand out, that also is a factor that has to be taken into account. That's why I add now, in addition to doctors, also talk to Rabbonim. And competent Rabbonim are in consultation with doctors. So find a Rav, your Rav, the person you trust. You say, I don't know who to trust. Well, that's sad. Maybe you should have found someone before. Okay, you didn't. So find someone now. But you have to have an objective opinion. And there's a Keyach HaTeirah. You know that when Bezdin paskins that Rosh Chodesh is a certain day and later they find out it was a mistake because the new moon was in another day, it still goes according to Bezdin. There's a Keyach HaTeirah. Now obviously if you have information, give it to the Rav, give it to the doctor. I didn't say you can't challenge your doctor, but you're not a doctor and you're not a Rav. At the end of the day, that's who we follow. And thank God for that, because if we didn't have Reifim and we didn't have Mumchim and we didn't have the Rabbonim, then what? Who are you going to turn to? Then it becomes completely free for all. Okay. So my answer is I'm not going to defend. I totally agree that if there are guidelines passed out and the Rabbonim and the doctors are stating that, it's absolutely reckless for people to have different type of conduct, especially putting others at danger. And I've heard very strong statements about places like 770 and other places, what Rabbonim said. The fact that people are not listening, that's absolutely reckless. It's worse than a mezuzah on your door, maybe, in a way, because this is pekuach nefesh. But at the same time, I'm not disregarding that there are controversies, but that doesn't mean we should take the law in our own hands and medicine in our own hands. At the end of the day, there's guidelines with Torah, and as I said, there's a way to come at the determination. You can't go to 100, you can't keep going to doctors until you find the right one that fits your opinion. That's not the way to go. Torah, the whole point of Torah and authorities is to listen to them. So that's my response, and I absolutely condemn anyone that does anything, hepech HaTorah, hepech medicine, and hepech guidelines. But it should be filtered through the authorities that we can rely on, that we know. Okay. With conflicting messages coming from different sources about our behavior during these times, what and who should we believe? So I think I touched upon this a bit in the previous discussion here, but I'll just go further. The conflicting messages, depending who they're coming from. If they're coming from politicians, I would say you can't believe anybody, because everyone has an agenda. They want to be reelected, or they want to be elected. They have power grabs. They have all kinds of agendas. They may be right, maybe not right. The Torah never says go to politicians to know what to do. That's why I go back to the Torah says go to Rabbonim, go to Rishus L'Rei Filarapis. Best is both of those together. That's how I would approach it. So there's a conflicting message. Like some are arguing very strongly now that masks have not helped. Lockdowns do not help. I've read many articles. Again, I'm not going to rule on this. I did not do research. I'm also not in the capacity. I'm not a medical authority. And I'm not a pesach. This needs to be addressed. If you see such articles, bring it to your authority. Let them read. Let them do the research. That's the job of a achrei. I have my areas of responsibility. I'm going to do my research. Before I speak here, I make sure I'm going to say what I researched. I'm not just saying things that come from whim. So that's what I would say. I go back to Ein Lecha Ben Chayrin again, Torah. The conflicting messages can be so confusing and so exacerbating, so frustrating, even worse. They could drive you crazy. You literally see such conflicting messages. So the question is, maybe it's time to shut down the media in your life. As I said, if you go kol deposhet MyLife, you go to a Rav, you go to your doctor, and combined, both. maybe things will be a lot simpler. Because when you listen to that, what's going on, the chatter, the pundits, and then the media just adding to the fuel to the fire, it's one big mess. I'd like someone to tell me some clarity you're getting from all these opinions. So I don't know what to say. I go back to practical things. You and your family and your community, we have directives. The bigger picture, I'm going to have to rely on God. Leiv Sarim and Malachim B'Yad Hashem. God figured out what to do 4 years ago, the election. I trust that God will figure out what to do now. The media, can the media be trusted? I think it's a rhetorical question. I don't think they can be trusted. They also have agendas, and sometimes we don't even know the agendas, so it makes it even worse. But we are not without solutions. Solutions we turn to the higher forces. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Ein Gott. We have one God and one Torah. That is our redemption. That's our salvation. Okay, next question. What attitude should we have to the government's enforcement of health measures in Orthodox Jewish communities and to the protests and mass burnings in response? Are Jews being unfairly targeted? If yes, what should we do about it? Okay. Well, the problem is that there's truth to both sides of the story here. There's no question when you start looking closer, especially in the city of New York, I'm sure in other cities as well, but New York, California, but New York, we've seen this, that there were public gatherings. I believe there's one now in Washington today. There was one in Washington. There was the Black Lives Matter protests in New York, where they did not see enforcement, not only not enforcement of health guidelines, but not enforcement of law in general. It was looting, complete chaos in the streets, complete lawlessness. So then suddenly you see a crackdown on a certain community or a shul, you say, what's going on here? Where's the equal treatment? If it's equal treatment, there's one thing. So that right away provokes people to say, okay, let's burn mass and the demonstrations. Is that right? No, I wouldn't condone that either. I understand where it's coming from, but maybe there has to be other ways, in court, in the media, through information. I do not believe that's a Torah way that we should get up and protest with burning masks, which creates a very wrong message, especially by people who may be even wearing masks, and behavior that's not fitting for a Jew. Okay, in Yankiv. Ask your Rav before you do a protest like this. Is there a Rav that... And don't look for one radical Rav. Talking about people who are accepted, who you accept always, and I already said earlier, 2 out of 3 if necessary. So the problem is when 2 wrongs are going, it's very difficult to address it, because from alle Seiten you have a problem, from all sides. So there's no question, if you do indeed believe and see certain type of focus and emphasis, like I said, in the Orthodox Jewish communities, whether it's anti-Semitic or because they are anti-Trump, the people enforcing and so on, definitely take measures. I did not say we should be passive, but the measures should not be through methods that others have been using that are far more, seem even criminal at times. Because it does not create the right impression. It's not the Torah approach. So that's my general response to that. And again, if someone's behaving in a reckless way, even if they have a good reason why they're doing so, that does not justify a Torah to do things that put people at risk, health-wise or otherwise. With unrest in Borough Park, someone writes, this past week between those who want their shuls open during a pandemic and those who say, please follow health officials' advice and wear masks and don't have large gatherings, I want to ask a serious question. What is Mesida? Mesida in Hebrew means when you inform on someone to authorities. Is there really a halacha that allows the community to beat up or even kill a moser? Meaning that the community can go beat up and kill someone who's an informer? To my understanding, Mesida would apply in a case that, let's say, where 2 neighbors are having a dispute over property lines and fences and can't resolve their dispute amicably. And then for revenge, one neighbor calls the czar and says, hey, this guy has a secret illegal mikveh in his basement to get the guy arrested or worse. But in a case where, let's say, an unstable person walks into a school with a weapon and makes violent threats and someone calls the police, to me that would not be Mesida. That takes an action to help prevent people from being injured. Yes, it's called a redif. I'm adding that. So if two men in Bar Park call the police to report a shul having unsafe practices during a pandemic, that shouldn't be Mesidah. Also, let's say there's a case where someone actually is a Moser, an informer. If someone calls out the Moser publicly, wouldn't it make the person who called them out also a Moser? Is it truly an absurd world we live in? It is truly an absurd world we live in. Hashem help us. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson. I respect your opinion and await hearing what you think about the situation. Well, you touch upon important points. Mesidah is not a small matter. I do not want to paskin. I never paskin in this program. This is a question for a Rav, to be honest. No, I do not believe that even if someone is a Moser and did something wrong, you should go beat him up in public or those things like that. But you have to address it with a Rav. Because they can argue, the shul can argue, we don't believe in those health principles that the government is making. So what are you informing on us? It's not that we are behaving recklessly. They don't agree that they're reckless. If they were indeed reckless, you see a person with a knife running in the street, everyone agrees it's a danger. So it's a din reidiv, there's no Mesidah, there's no Lashon Hara, there's none of these laws apply. Pekuach nefesh. The question is it Pekuach nefesh? Is going on a plane Pekuach nefesh with a mask? I've been on a plane. So sitting in a shul with a mask, pretty close, like it is in a plane, is that less Pekuach, more Pekuach nefesh? So I'm not here to paskin. I'm not even trying to throw questions on it. I'm just pointing out that first you have to establish what is right and what is wrong. Then establish if someone was a Moser, and then what you do with a Moser. Just trying to be sober about it instead of emotional about it. There's a Torah for these things. And I emphasize it again, why do we have Torah if not for these issues? In Shemayim, they don't need Torah. There's no such disagreements. Everything is clear. It's dafkin here, like Moshe told the Malachim. Were you ever in Mitzrayim? Do you ever have a temptation to kill someone? Do you have a father and mother? It's precisely in a world like ours where we have these challenges why we need Torah. And now more than ever. And that would clear up a lot of things if we all listened to Torah. Now you could have two different Torah authorities have different opinions. That's why I said, Ba'asar the Rav, you go to the Rav of your community, the one you trust. You go to 2 out of 3. Hopefully the Rabbanim maybe can come together in a time like this and find some consensus and even describe situations that may have exceptions. And one final question, cosmic message. What higher message is there to be learned from the confluence of chaos happening now in so many areas, from the pandemic to the political, racial, economic, etc.? So briefly, because of limited time, let me say this. I spoke about this a lot in episode 300 and on. The two main things I take away when I do research in Torah and Halacha and history about pandemics, Yesh Dever, Sugin Gemara and Baba Kama Daf Samach Amid Beis, Broad Shulchan Aruch, when there's a plague, what to do? 2 things. Chamira sakanta mi'isuda. A sakona, a danger, is much harsher than an isur. That's why pikuach nefesh is deichik all the isurim. So let's say on Yom Kippur, to save a life, you have to eat a piece of chazer, Rachmana litzlan. I say Rachmana litzlan not because of Yom Kippur, because of chazer. To save a life on Yom Kippur, that's called sanctifying Yom Kippur. Because sakona comes chai behem. Except the 3 things, Yarek Val Yaver, Vedezor, Shvichas Dom, and Gilui Arayis. So that's the first thing. Pikuach nefesh, even 1% suffik, you err on the side of caution. That's why even if there's doubts, and I go back, good Rabbanim will say, if there's doubts, it's enough for me. Can I say for sure that wearing a mask is going to save lives? But there's a doubt that maybe it will. Or social distancing, or closing a shul, or limiting public assembly, and so on. So that's one tremendous important thing. It's not Mesiras Nefesh to be able on something with Pekuach Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh, if there's a gzeira from a government that you shouldn't be a Yid, is one thing. But when it comes to Pekuach Nefesh of health, that is greater than everything. The second thing that far less people are aware of, it's a gzeira l'mayla when there's a global pandemic, a communal, a makas medina. We learn it all from the Pasuk when the Eibishter says, Makas B'cheres, the first plague, the 10th plague, of the first killing of the firstborn. Va'atem, Moshe says to them, Leiseitzu ish mepesach beisei ad beker. You should not leave the home till the morning. What, the Eibishter couldn't tell between a Mitzri and a Jew? But nitin reshus lamashkis, Rashi brings from the Gemara, from Medrash. It's a time where you have to be humble. A time, don't rock the boat. Don't dance in front. Why do we quiet on Yom Kippur? Matan Torah was with Kelos of Rakim, a lot of sound. It created an ayin hara. Now, after the Chet Egel, be humble. Serve quietly. There are times that we have to lay low. We don't have to be arrogant. Whatever's going on in heaven, we don't know. So a time like this, be humble. Stay low. Don't have to become a whole activist and so on. You see an injustice? Absolutely. Act on it. There are many ways to act on things. We have courts, we have other ways. But I think it's vital that all of us have that sense of humility. It's critical, especially at a time like this. Don't rock the boat. You don't have to shift things. I've been invited many places. I don't go, not because I've had COVID already. So in a way I'm immune. Who knows, to be honest. But I don't want to rock the boat. There's no need. I'm a public person. People see, they learn, they interpret, don't interpret. I'm just giving you an example. I'm a believer, it's yellow light. Proceed with caution. You have to do something? So check with a Rav, with a doctor, etc. You don't have to. What? Muchrich to do certain things that are optional? This doesn't mean you're living in fear. On the contrary, you're living up Torah, up where the Eibishter wants. That's the most important thing of all. Okay, I think I covered this. As far as the cosmic message, just briefly, Chassidus talks about yesh, ayin, yesh. Whenever there's a new world order to be born, a new reality, you have to go through an ayin, a disruption. So those disruptions can be painful and loss and death. But overall, I have no question in my mind. The cosmic messages the world is going through a disruption, preparing it for a new world order. It's called Geula Mitis Vashlema. So the cosmic, when you see a confluence of so many disparate events, they're just adding to complete unknown and uncertainty. Yeah, you can be thrown by it, or you learn to navigate and say, you know what, this is leading to something greater. I don't really see why, how. I don't see how. I don't see what it's going to be yet, but I will navigate. That's what a good swimmer does. We'll talk more about this, but due to limits of time, let me just finish with the Chassidus question, and I want to just talk about the essay and the creative contest briefly. So the Chassidus question is, what is the significance of saying V'yakov holech lidarko at the end of the Tishrei holidays? Well, this is a pizgim from the Rabbeim. It comes from the Pasuk in the Parsha Vayetze, when Yaakov is leaving love and going back to Yisrael. V'yakov holech lidarko, Yaakov went on his way. So they use this, that after Tishrei, and all the Giluyim of Tishrei, V'yakov holech lidarko, the Jew goes on his way, literally after the Aliyah L'Regel, Sukkos. People return to their homes. But this also applies in general, also spiritually. We're going from Tishrei, as I mentioned before, the saturated month of holiness and all the high holidays, going back to each one to our way. The Rebbe explains in the Sichos of Tovshin Lamed Ches, Motzei Shabbos Bereshis and Noach, how each there's tkufas. In V'kocha it says already Sukkos. The beginning, first, second day of Sukkos is already V'yakov holech lidarko. Some places it says after Simchas Torah, some places Shabbos Bereshis, some say Zayin Cheshvan, Parshas Noach. Because there are stages as we transition from the high and the power of Tishrei into Cheshvan. I explained more the whole idea earlier, but that's the V'yakov holech lidarko. And it's V'yakov, not Yisrael, V'yakov, because it's Ekev, Yud Ekev. Because we're going on our way in the Ekev, sometimes they heal, where there's more concealment in this world. So the beginning of the Parsha says, Vayetze Yaakov me Be'er Sheva, Vayelech Charana. He went from Be'er Sheva to Charana. And now he's going back, Yaakov holech lidarko, going back on his way to deal with the worldly matters, filled with all the Aveda that he did for the 20 years, with Avedas Hatzain and so on. Now, before Tishrei, we announced the 6th annual MyLife Chassidus Applied Essay and Creative Contest. So the custom has been that I've been reading and reviewing briefly. So I did, before Yontif, the last program, episode 326, I did the first place winner of the essay and first place of the creative. I will now do the second place essay and creative. And next week I also want to do the Hebrew essays, but let me do now the second place essay. The second place winner, $3,600 winner, was Shana Slavin, Shlucha Machne Yehuda Yerushalayim, home city Sydney, Australia, age 20. The topic, A Time to Heal. I must say that this essay is heart-wrenching. And anyone's going to read it, which is available at ChassidusApplied.com. Just brace yourself. It's a very, very raw essay about abuse, but extremely powerful, especially anyone dealing with this. Very empowering. I have heard a lot of comments of people how much this essay has helped them. So it's a unique essay in that sense, and dealing with unfortunate, real pain, abuse situation, and with practical suggestions. Anyone dealing with this has not yet dealt with this is a must-read essay. It'll help you get through it, or at least begin the process of healing, talking about it. Those that are already in it, this can also be very helpful. So I'm not going to read the details of it. I leave it to you. But it is a real tribute. A person who had the courage at 20 years old to write such an essay, I must say. It's quite impressive. As far as the creative contest, the second place is Sarah Blau, extracurricular director of Beis Rivka from Brooklyn, New York, age 31. Her topic was soaring free, and the creative format she used was mixed media with text and visual. So just to read briefly, in an age when so many grapple with the dark side of human emotions, even to the extent of addiction and suicide ideation, it is crucial to address it head on. She talks about pain and negative feelings based on a mimer of Ahichai Yisara of the Rebbe, and using the different approaches that Rebbe talks about in that mimer, and turns it into an actual musical and narration that's very moving. And again, you can find these at ChassidusApplied.com right at the homepage. And with that, we conclude this week's episode. Welcome back. I welcome myself back to now, hopefully, an uninterrupted continuum every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 327. Next week will be 328. Please submit your questions. Everyone should have a good gebenchte, gesunte Jahr, healthy year. A good gebenchte, gesunte month of Cheshvan. The whole year should be ploy sarenu. We see with our own eyes wonders in health, in parnasa, in livelihood, in nachas from children, nachas from ourselves, in marrying off children, from our grandchildren, and in every aspect of life, all in the best of health. Everyone be well and have a good Chodesh.